Okay. Shh. Welcome. Shh. Welcome back. Welcome back. Any questions before we get started? All right. I want to talk about the midterm and the exam for a few minutes, and then we'll get started with today's lesson. We are now at class 13, right? 13. So we're roughly halfway through the semester. Can you believe it? You are almost halfway done with me. I know you can't wait to get out of here. At this point, you should be more or less ready to handle the midterm from last year. Now, I say more or less because every semester is a little bit different. This year we've had some cancellations, weather, et cetera. So we might not be in the exact same place we were last year, but it should be ballpark for you enough. Now, I think you guys have a Langdell on Saturday, right? Next week.
They're moving on.
It got moved. Oh, that's not nice. Well, in any event, you don't need that Langdell to do what I have to say. I'd like for you to start thinking about taking the midterm on your own, 90 minutes in the library. Kendra will help you go over it in her Langdell. Is it going to be next week? Oh, all right. Well, I will email Kendra today after class, and I'll ask her. Actually, let's do it right now. When is your next Langdell? Okay. She responds very quickly to email. Okay. Eventually, Kendra will have it. But that doesn't matter. You should do it on your own, regardless of when the Langdell is. And let me just say a few words on it before we get started. If you go to the syllabus, I list all my old exams. You'll see midterm, fall of 2018. Okay? You should do it. And here's how I recommend you go about doing it. Just bear with me for a minute. The midterm is 90 minutes. You should take 90 minutes. And that doesn't mean 30 minutes here and 20 minutes there and 20 minutes there. You need to find a block of 90 minutes straight through. I know that's not easy for law students. You have divided attention spans. People are calling you. Dog, you have to walk. You have to go eat dinner. Find a time, 90 minutes straight. I know it's hard, but it will make your life a lot easier at the end of the semester. The exam's 90 minutes. You have 1,000 words. That means 1,000 words, not 1,000 characters. 1,000 characters is like 1,000 letters. 1,000 words. Please do not exceed the word limit. If you do, I stop reading, and then you're in a bad spot. Okay, everyone with me? The exam itself is pretty short. I think the entire thing is about 2 pages long. Okay? The exam begins with instructions. I know that sounds obvious. Read the instructions very carefully. The instructions will always tell you who are the parties and what are the pieces of property. That's useful for you to know. I am not very original. Black acre, white acre, green acre, red acre. I'm not very original, right? Read the instructions very carefully. Especially usually the last sentence. It says here the kingdom applies all American common law rules with a 5-year period for all statute of limitations and a notice recording statute. I give you these facts very deliberately. If I tell you that you're in a notice recording statute and then you go and apply, say, a race recording statute, you're going to be wrong. If you do a race notice, you're going to be wrong. If I say you're in American common law and then you apply the third restatement, you're wrong. If I say there's a 5-year limitation period and you apply a 10-year limitation period, you're wrong. Don't fight me. Don't say, well, in Texas it's 10 years. I know it is. I know it's 10 years. I know that's the answer. But I am asking you questions with these specific instructions. So please do not fight these. About 10% of you will ignore them. That's fine. Happens every year. I don't want you to be in that 10%. After you get through the instructions, I would read through the exam twice straight through before you even write a word. It might take you 15 or 20 minutes, but trust me, the second reading, right? The second reading, you'll catch stuff you missed the first go around. I word these exams very deliberately and very carefully. And there might be some words that don't quite add up, right? It's like, wait a minute, Josh, that doesn't make sense. And you might have to read it a second time to realize what I'm getting at, right? I may, omit a piece of information quite deliberately. And that missing information is the reason why the question comes out the way it does. So this question involves something you've seen before with a piece of landlocked property, middle acre. It involves one of these, right? A grantee grantor index. We've studied this, right? I'll give you a hint. The stuff in this table does not line up with the stuff in that table. And one of the things that you have to decide and figure out for your own is what's not lining up. How come these aren't matching? Okay? All right, so that's question number 1. Then you have question number 2 about assessing the title. This is a trespassing adverse possession question. Question 3 involves covenants. That's our topic for today, which is why I think you're now more or less ready for this topic after Lee's class today. Another question, marketable title. The last question is what I always call the policy question, which gives students the most anxiety, but it really shouldn't. The policy question isn't asking whatever you have in your mind, dump it on paper. No. The policy question is trying to tap into certain kinds of discussions we've had throughout the course of the semester. Right? For this one, discuss the pros and cons that the judiciary should consider when applying the doctrine of implied easements. So for example, when you're implying an easement, that means you're depriving someone of their bundle of sticks, right? These are issues we've discussed, and we had cases on this. We had the case from the Hood Canal case from the last class, right? I'm blanking on the name. It was of course I have the Brown versus Voss case we did from yesterday, right, or from Tuesday. Don't just give me the doctrine. Give me the case. That's actually very helpful. I know you're actually paying attention to the cases. The exam's open book, so if you don't remember the name of the case, I'm not going to kill you about it, but you can at least look it up. And it's a case about the applied easement across the road. Okay. Take 90 minutes, and then after you take those 90 minutes, I want you to grade yourself. I put 2 documents online. The first is the A+ answer, and the second document is what I call the memo. This is what I call the hybrid A+ answer. Why is it called a hybrid? Each question, there are 5 questions, is graded on a scale of 1 to 10. So a perfect score is 50, right? I've never given a perfect 50. Hasn't happened yet. I've given, 43, 44, 46. I think I once had a 47. It was a very good paper. But I've never had a perfect 50. Hasn't happened yet. But what I do have is, John gets 10, Sally gets 10, Billy gets 10, Nancy gets 10, right? So I take all the best answers and I plop them all together, right? And that's what we call the hybrid A+. What you'll find is that this is more than 1,000 words. Please don't complain about that. I know. Because I took from different exams, it's not 1,000 words perfectly, but it's better in the long run. I want you to compare your answer to the A+. They don't have to match perfectly. In fact, when I write these exams, there's not a single right answer in mind. They're open-ended. And in fact, they're usually close questions, right? Is a covenant valid or not? It can go either way, right? Right? Is the title marketable? Maybe yes, maybe no. It's always going to be a close question. Listen to me very carefully. I don't care which answer you pick, so long as you justify your answer. If the person says here the title's marketable, and you decide, no, it's not marketable, you might be right also. Don't think you're wrong, because I want to see how you justify your answer. But The reason why I give you this A+ is not to say this is the right answer. It's a model answer. It's to show you how to write it. What sort of analysis I'm looking at. If you want to think about this in terms of the IRAC, IRAC, you learn in legal writing, I want the A. I don't really care about the IR and the C. You'll learn those aren't very important once you get where you need to go. The analysis is where all the money is, right? If you spend all of your time saying the facts, you're going to run out of space. You only have 1,000 words. 1,000 words, it's about a page, right? If you want to think of it more precisely, you have 5 questions, 1,000 words, 200 words per question. 200 words times 5, right? So that means you roughly have 5 or 6 sentences per question, right? So your answer should look roughly like these. One other note on timing. You have 90 minutes. I recommend you take about 20 minutes to read the question twice, 15, 20 minutes. That leaves you about an hour left over. If you have an hour to write 5 questions, that's about 10 to 12 minutes per question, right? So you have about 10 or 12 minutes per question. If you find yourself spending 30 minutes in the first question, you're going to run out of time. And that's okay. If you do the midterm on your own and you run out of time, I'm okay with that. I am okay with that because you learned your lesson early when it didn't count. But what this should teach you is, oh man, I need to adjust my time skills. And that's I can help you with, right? If you say, Josh, I can't get past question 3. Okay, I can help you with it. I can give you tips, right? You can control yourself. You can limit how much time you take to write. You can change your outline. I can work with that. But you need to actually run through this straight 90 minutes to give yourself a realistic assessment. Are you on track? Okay. So go through the A+ answer, compare yours to it. Please don't cheat. Don't look at the A+, then do the exam. You're only hurting yourself. You're not giving yourself any favors. Then go ahead and read what I call the memo. I write this memo to the students after the exam to explain what I was looking for, right? To explain how I want you to approach the question. This is not an answer key. This is my general thinking. And this should give you some insights into how I do the exam. Okay. Now, I know your office hour is a little bit tricky, but I would be happy to meet with you a couple points. I'm free from 12 to 1, which I think your own class, right? I'm sorry, 11 to 12, your own class. And after this, your own class? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought so. Okay, one other option. I'm going to come in on Friday the 18th, which is a Friday, and I'll be around. Don't make an appointment, just come on by, and I'll come chat with you. My common law students will also be meeting that day, so I have to wait a little bit, but I will make time to meet with as many people as I can. When you come by, don't email me, please. I can't do 100 attachments. It's too much. Just print it out, and we'll go over it. Makes my life easier and your life easier. If you give me 100 attachments, I'm not going to find it in time, digging through emails, and I don't want to have to do that. But do this earlier rather than later. We're now roughly halfway through the semester. If something went horribly wrong, we can take corrective action. But if you don't talk to me, then I won't know about it till the final, and then that's on you. Okay. But I want to work with you. It's very important to actually get this feedback early. Okay. Questions? None? No questions on the exam thing? Usually people's hands are up. Nothing? Yes. I hand first and come down here. Yeah.
So don't email you that?
Please don't. Okay. Just print it. Yeah. The reason why is when there are about 80 of you here, and about 120 emails, I can't keep them straight. It creates, just print it out, and I'll go over it with you. Okay, and just bring it with you when you show up. Don't give it to me here and expect me to hold on to it. It's just too many papers. Yes, Jacqueline?
It was the same question.
Yeah, don't email it. I know you want to email it. Just print it. I know. It's a page. I'm sorry, but it makes my life easier. Okay, any other questions? All righty, very good. Let's do a poll question, please. Where are we? Okay, here we are. And this will give a little bit of a review from the reading. Okay, so this is your question. A owns Blackacre. B owns Whiteacre. B sells A an easement that allows A to cross Whiteacre. And here's the question. At common law, A and B are in privity of estate. True or false? Okay. Another 10 seconds or so. All right. All right. So where am I? Who's next? Oh, I appreciate the honesty. All right, Elliot. Let me ask you a few questions here. All right. So we have A and B, right? B sells A an easement that allows A to cross Whiteacre. Which one is the dominant estate, Elliot? And which one's the servient estate? In this question.
Whiteacre would be the servitude.
Okay. What about the dominant estate?
Blackacre.
Well, what kind of easement is this?
Easement and gross.
It's an easement and gross. How do you know it's an easement and gross? What? Well, what's the difference between easement and gross and easement appertenant? You got to know this cold. Grant, what's the difference between easement and gross and easement appertenant?
Easement and gross runs with the land,
Well,
or runs with the estate.
Don't say runs with the land. What's the difference between easement and gross and easement appertenant? Just in plain English. You're making this
The
it's on the tip of your tongue.
burden attaches to the estate
Okay.
of a person.
And what about the benefit?
The benefit,
Who, with an easement and gross, who has the benefit?
the dominant estate.
Wrong. Zach.
The person.
The person. That's right. You need to know this. Cold. 3 in a row, 2 in a row didn't know this. Is not good. With an easement and gross, the benefit belongs to a person. Who's the person here, Zach?
A.
Yes. A is allowed to cross Whiteacre. So, Zach, is there a dominant estate in this question?
No.
That's correct. There is no dominant estate. With an easement and gross, you don't have a dominant estate. You have a servient estate, but not dominant. Okay, I've done this question at least 3 times with you already. Okay? All right, so Natalie, question for you. How would you characterize relationship between A and B?
Sorry, what do you mean by relationship? Like
What transaction did A and B do? What was their transaction?
easement and gross, right?
Okay. And how is that easement and gross created?
I guess by writing or
How are easements usually created, Natalie? Traditionally, common law. How would you create an easement? What would you have to do?
put in writing and no, sorry. Would it be just by putting it in the estate? Like it would be so it could either attach to the land or the person, but if you are doing it if it's an easement and gross, then it could be implied, right?
Mackenzie, how do you create an easement in common law? What do you have to do? This should be really obvious. If you guys are, so 4 in a row, or it's 3 or 4. Would that be effective at common law? could you just convey an easement? Let me point. If this is struggling with you, you need to go back and watch the last 3 classes worth of videos. This is nothing new. Ethan?
If you're the owner of the estate and you would have to reserve the easement for yourself.
With more precisely.
So like if I was the one that was selling White Acre, then or Black Acre. If I wanted Black Acre that had the easement, I would have to be the owner and I would have to sell it to someone else.
Yes. In this case, B simply sold the easement the same way you'd sell a widget, right? Ethan, could you do that common law? That's correct. At common law, that would not be valid, right? At common law, an easement had to be reserved when you sell Black Acre or you sell White Acre. You have to sell Black Acre with the easement attached to it, right? Look how I'm framing these questions, right? This is how I can trick you on an exam. At common law, this would not be an effective easement. It would not be valid because the easement was sold as if it were just a widget. You're just selling an easement. You can't do that. Okay? So, Morgan, let's see if you can describe it. How would you describe the relationship between A and B here? What kind of relationship do they have?
I would just say it's maybe a privy of contract.
Is this privy of estate? What's the difference between privy of estate and privy of contract?
Privy of estate, they have to be, well, in this there would be a relationship because the easement would be valid to be privy of estate, but they'd be privy of contract because they had a sale.
Okay, she's right. Let's see what we got here. Okay. The answer here is false, but I want to make sure you understand why that answer is false. We have these 2 concepts, right? Privy of estate and privy of contract. I think Morgan gave us the definition of both of them a minute ago, right? Privy of estate and privy of contract. Sorry, I say that really quickly. Privity. I say privy, and I shouldn't say it, but privity of estate and privity of contract. Here, they had a land contract for sale, right? Remember the contract of sale we did like the first or maybe the second week of class? Right? It was that long document, right? For contract of sale, you're just conveying one interest from A to B, right? You can convey an easement from A to B. And that's valid, right? You can do that. There's no problem with it. The problem is it won't bind anyone else, right? When you convey this easement from A to B, allow A to walk across. You can allow someone to come across your land. Right? That's an agreement. But it's not going to be a valid easement for someone else. Right? Why? Because they only have privity of contract. Privity means a relationship, right? In this case, relationship is only a matter of contract, not contract law. Don't think of like the UCC, whatever. Think of the contract of sale. They do not have privity of estate. The way to obtain privity of estate is through the transfer of property. This is Ethan's answer a minute ago, right? If White Acre was sold with the easement reserved on it, again, if the property is sold with the easement reserved on it, then you have privity of estate. 1 second, Jen, okay? Promise. You need to be able to distinguish privity of contract and privity of estate for this class to make any sense. It will not make sense otherwise, right? It's not really important for easements, right? It becomes very important for covenants. Let me say this one more time. If you have a contract of sale, you have privity of contract. That's easy, right? That's almost automatic. If you have a written contract, you have privity of contract. You can sell the widget. You can sell the easement just like you're selling a widget, right? A to B. But in order to have privity of estate, you have to have the land sold with the easement reserved, or in this case, the covenant reserved, right? There has to be a transaction of land. That you're not just conveying a contract of sale, you're conveying an estate. What is estate? Black Acre. You're selling Black Acre with the easement attached. White Acre with the easement attached to it. Okay, Jen, patiently waiting.
Is privity of estate different here than it was last semester when we talked about like leasehold and like these sublease and
Maybe. Remind me how you're understanding. I can tell you right or wrong, because the answer, depending your definition, maybe yes, maybe no.
Like with subleasing, because there was like a time in between, it was privy of contract but not privy of state. But with assignment, because they were doing the whole, the successive owner had privity of estate.
Okay, so you said something very, okay, that's what I was looking for, okay. So you said, okay, do you remember the difference between an assignment and a sublease? Just vaguely, right? With a sublease, the original lessee keeps some interest in the land, right? But with an assignment, the entirety of the leasehold, the entire bundle of sticks, so to speak, goes to a third party, right? And when you have the entire bundle being transferred, there's privity of estate. It's exactly the same thing. You don't have to give fee simple to have privity of estate. You give whatever interest you have. So let's just say I own a life estate in Blackacre, and I give you, Jen, my entire life estate. We're in privity of estate, right? You have the exact same estate I have, right? It doesn't have to be fee simple. It's just I give whatever interest I have to you. Or let's say I give you my life estate with an easement attached to it. There's privity of estate between the two of us, right? But if I just give you the easement by itself, that's not my entire estate. I still have the rest of the bundle myself. Therefore, there's only privity of contract, which is just basically I'm selling you a widget. I think of it as selling a widget. It's an easier way. Like you're not selling the entire bundle. But if you want to think of it like a sublease, that works also if you remember from last term. That's a good recollection. It's a good way of thinking about it, right? You have to think, if I have fee simple and I give you fee simple, there's privity of estate. I don't have anything left over. If I have a life estate and I give you a life estate, there's privity of estate, there's nothing left over. The entire bundle's gone. Jacqueline.
In kind of the section that Jen was just talking about, and I have from the sublease and assignment section, it says that privity of estate is a conveyance of right of possession, whereas privity of contract is if the lease also contains a promise by one party to another.
That's what I was not looking for. I liked your answer better, right? The terms aren't exactly perfect, meaning the same word can mean different things in different contexts. But the thing that Jen said is what I was looking for. It's that you to see to the entire estate. That's the key point here. So don't get too hung up with the sublease chapter. It's not a perfect analogy, right? Keep in mind with terminology, things don't always mean the same thing in different places. Like vertical privity can mean two different things in the same damn graph, which I'll get to in a minute. Okay, everyone with me? But everyone get that point, right? This is only privity of contract because there's no transfer of an estate. You don't have the full bundle of sticks going. Okay. Why is this important? We're starting a new topic today, which I think is probably the hardest topic of the semester. Well, depending on who you ask, I think it's the hardest, which is the topic of covenants. We're going to be talking about two types of these servitudes. The first type is called real covenant at law. Real covenant at law. The second type of servitude is called an equitable servitude. An equitable servitude. Now, what's the difference between these two? I'll give you an easy definition that won't be very helpful later, but I'll start you off easy. A real covenant at law is written. It's in writing, right? It's in writing. And generally, when a real covenant law is violated, the remedy you seek is damages, right? At law, you seek damages, money. Okay? The second category is different. Generally, not always, but generally, equitable servitudes are not in writing. Courts enforce them as a matter of equity, fairness, right? Courts are enforcing them as a matter of equity or fairness. Think of the Tulk versus Moxhay case we have in a few minutes. Whereas with law, the remedy is damages. In equity, the remedy is injunction, right? Where a court orders to stop using land in a certain fashion or to continue using land in a certain fashion, right? So that's a simple definition, which is going to be blown up in a few minutes, but that just gets you started, right? Law, real covenants at law, you get damages. Equitable servitudes, you get an injunction, okay? Everyone with me? Okay. Okay, so now at some point, someone's going to ask me, Josh, what's the difference between an easement and a covenant? Some of you thinking about that when you're doing your reading? If you weren't, you should, right? You're not going to like my answer. The answer is history. At various times in English history, some courts would enforce easements and other courts are enforcing covenants. So these sorts of servitudes evolved in different eras. Okay? Now, why does it matter for you? Covenants are a lot more complicated. With easements, all you have to worry about is, oh, is this an easement in gross or an easement per tenant? That's easy, right? But that only tells you who is currently bound. What makes a covenant so much more complicated is this awful, awful chart, which you will want to destroy by the end of this topic, right? This topic is designed to teach you how covenants can bind parties on both sides of the equation. So please turn to, I think it's 835, 36, I'm sorry, the text and then the things on 836, thank you. Okay? I'm going to walk through this very slowly. If you don't understand, raise your hand, but I'm going to walk through as slowly as I can. Okay. Ready? Okay, let's do this. So you start off with two plots of land. You have Blackacre, and of course you have Whiteacre. One of these is going to be burdened. One of these is going to be benefited. So we see here that A owns Whiteacre and B owns Blackacre. All right? B is the promisor. A is the promisee. Which is which? The promisor gives the promise. The promisee receives the promise. Okay? All right, everyone with me? All right, so we see it says here that A, the promisee, with a benefit to Whiteacre, and B, the promisor, with a burden on Whiteacre. Okay? B, the owner of Blackacre, promises A, the owner of Whiteacre. Everyone see that, right? B, the owner of Blackacre, gives a promise to A, the owner of Whiteacre. And what is that promise? We'll just make it easy. That B will not be used for industrial purposes, only residential. Okay? I'll say it one more time. B promises A that Blackacre will be used for residential purposes. Everyone with me? Okay? I know it's painfully slow. All right. How then do we characterize the relationship between A and B? I think, I can't see your name tag. Ashley, okay. Ashley, how do we characterize relationship between A and B? What's their relationship in this case?
They're in horizontal privity. They have
Privity of what? Don't help her. Oh, which one is it? Is it privy of contract or privy of estate? The picture won't tell you, unfortunately. The picture's not helpful.
They made the.
What do you need to have privy of estate? What has to happen?
You need to have a single land transaction with a covenant reserve.
Good. Did that happen here? Well, I didn't tell you.
Oh.
This is all you have. Is there any indication that there was any transfer of an estate here?
Yes, because there's horizontal privilege.
No. No. What do you think, Bina?
I thought you just said that he, he said that he would use it for residential purposes only.
Is there any transaction of land here? No. What is the relationship? Promisor and promisee. What was actually given?
Just a covenant on its own.
Bingo. And what do we call that? Well, it's just a covenant on its own being transferred. What kind of privity is that?
It's privity by contract.
Yes. Very good. Privity of contract. This is just the widget model, right? Right? The only thing that was transferred here was the covenant. B gave a promise to A. That's why it's promisor, promisee. Notice it's not grantor, grantee. Oh, right? It's promisor, promisee. There was no grant. There was no conveyance of land. Or you might want to be more precise, covenantor and covenantee, which is even worse. But promisor, promisee works just as well. There was no conveyance of property which would create privity of estate. There's only privity of contract. They sold the widget by itself. They sold the covenant by itself. Everyone understand that point, right? This is why I went 4 people in a row at the beginning of class. If you don't get the difference between privity of estate and privity of contract, this thing won't make sense to you. You have to get that much, right? You need to have conveyance here. Okay? Now, Josh, why is it labeled horizontal privity? Okay? I have problems with this book, and actually last year I complained at some length to the editor, and he actually agreed I was right. This diagram's a little misleading. I can show you the email later if you want, but he actually acknowledged that the book was misleading. We're in the freaking 8th edition, and he finally said, you know what, it's misleading. So I feel vindicated. But he actually acknowledged, like, yeah, we'll fix that for the next edition. The reason why I don't like this diagram is that the word vertical privity appears here, and vertical privity appears there. You would think the word vertical privity means the same thing in both columns, right? Wouldn't that be easy? Right? When you use a word like 4 inches apart, that the word is the same meaning. Wouldn't that be simple, right? No, it's not that simple. They have different meanings. So I don't want to get you too hung up on the words horizontal and vertical. I think the more I teach it, the less I even care about horizontal and vertical. It doesn't even like, I don't want you to tell me horizontal and vertical. I want to hear you say privity of contract or privity of estate. Okay? Make sense? I know the picture says horizontal and vertical, but you'll see in a minute the word vertical means one thing here and one thing there, which is not right. Maybe I'll make my own version of this stupid diagram, and you know. But anyway, but I'm gonna work with it. Okay. All right, Elizabeth. So let's continue this question, right? So next, I'm going to tell you that B over here sells Blackacre to C. Okay. B sells Blackacre to C. Okay. And I tell you that B had fee simple, and he sells fee simple to C. Okay. How would you describe the relationship between those two? You can use the label, but just tell me what's going on. Okay, good. Right. And the key point here, right? The key point here is that there's no reservation, right? The covenant was reserved up here. So what happens here is B sells his entire estate to C. Right? Right? The book calls this vertical privity, which, fine, I'll go along with, right? But the important point is when whatever the estate B has, C gets. But let's just be very careful here, right? B does not have fee simple absolute. Why? Because there's a covenant on it, right? Again, B's covenant says, Blackacre is only residential. Everyone heard what I said, right? So B doesn't have the full bundle of sticks. But whatever sticks he got, he gives over to C. Okay? Now, Elizabeth, can C certainly start to ignore the covenant? Can C ignore the covenant and start building a factory?
Do what he wants, and he's gonna be subject to.
Does the burden go down to C? That's the question. That's the question, right? This is the hard question. Does the burden go down to C, right? The entirety of this exercise is asking, is C bound by this covenant? That's what all this is building up to, my friends. Shaking your head, Bina, shake your head, no? Tell me why the answer is no.
Because even though B passed on, B and C had privity of estate, A and B never had privity of estate, they only had privity of contract.
Very good. Right. So I'm going to use the book's labels, understanding that they're not very good. But at common law, in order for the burden to go down, what's called the burden to run, you need two things. You need two things. You need both horizontal privity, that is privity of estate, and you need vertical privity, that is privity of estate. You can see why the terminology is confusing, because the same thing means different things, different contexts. Let me say, I know it happens every year. One more time. In order for the burden to run, two things have to be true. First, the initial transaction must be privity of estate, right? That B was sold with the covenant reserved on it, right? In other words, A sold B the Blackacre with a covenant reserved, right? A would have to sell Blackacre to B with a covenant reserved on it. That gets you horizontal privity or privity of estate. Then C has to step into B's shoes. Whatever estate B has, C has that. Think of the assignment versus the sublease that Jen mentioned a few minutes ago, right? C has to step into B's shoes, right? You need to have both of these things for the covenant to work. For the burden to run, you need to have both horizontal and vertical privity. I'll use the book's labels, which I don't like. Horizontal means vertical privity of estate, and the vertical means you step into the entire shoes. The reason why this screws up students every semester is that the language is almost meaningless, right? Privity of estate means one thing here, and privity of estate means another thing here. This is why Jacqueline's giving me a definition like, no, don't do that right now, right? The same phrase means different things, right? Up here, privity of estate means A sold Blackacre to B with a covenant reserved. That's what privity of estate means. This way, there is no covenant to reserve anymore. So what privity of estate means is you take the entirety of the bundle, whatever B has, C has, right? You need to understand, for the burden to run, you have to have both horizontal and vertical privity. You need to have both privity of estate going this way and privity of estate going this way. If you get confused, draw it out in your notes. Draw it on your exam paper, right? I promise you'll be drawing this exam all day long in the exam. Yes, Morgan?
So if the burden isn't run and then C doesn't have to abide by the covenant, and if C were to sell it to E, wouldn't C have fee simple absolute? Because wouldn't that just kind of, or would he still not have fee simple? Because it's like technically, since they don't have to abide by the covenant, it's really not, it really shouldn't take away on the price of it.
All right. Well, let me take a step back, and I want to address your question, but one step at a time, okay? Kayla, let me ask you a question, right? We have A and B. They have privity of estate, right?
Yes.
No, they don't. What kind of privity do they have? I tricked you. Very good. See, make sure you're paying attention. Very good. Let's say that B goes ahead and builds a factory on Blackacre. Can A sue B?
Yes.
Why? I think they only have privity of contract. I thought it's not effective.
But I thought the covenant still even was privity of contract.
Between who? Who's it affected between? Here, A and B have privity of contract. B goes in and builds a factory. Can A sue to stop it and get damages?
Yes.
But I thought we said the burden, it's not effective.
Covenant's still there though.
Yes, okay. She's right. I'll give you a hard time, but you're right. Between A and B, it's still effective, right? Let me say this again. Between A and B, this covenant's valid because you have a contract. You are suing on the contract, right? You have a contract. A and B can make a contract. That's fine. You're allowed to do this, right? Think of an easement in gross, right? You have A and B, you can make it fine. The problem arises, though, because at common law, they did not do it right. They did not do privity of estate. C is home free, which is your question, Morgan, right? Once B sells it to C, A cannot sue C. Oh, I said it. That sounds sloppy. A cannot sue C. It's not possible because the burden did not run. And then you ask me another one, you want to make it worse? C sues it, sells to E. Put E over there. It's as if the covenant doesn't even exist anymore.
So C could sell and fee simple?
I'm going to slightly say no because it's possible that C can sue it back, sell it back to B, and the covenant resurrects. So I don't want to, you know what I'm saying? Right? That's a good exam question, actually. But if the covenant doesn't die, it just sort of like is like dormant, right? It's like sleeping. Because like if in this case, if C, it's a tongue twister. If C sold it back to B, I think at that point the contract goes back into effect. It's kind of weird. I'm not sure if that would work. So I'm just going to say, don't phrase it that way. But your essence of your question is correct. By failing to get horizontal privity, by failing to get the privity of estate between the two of them, the covenant has no life beyond them. It dies. Right? So your entire existence in this class is figuring out whether both the both the burden runs, right? Is there horizontal, is there vertical? That's your mission in this class, which makes it really difficult. And by the way, this is an easy question because it's only one side, right? What happens if there's a benefit and burden on both sides? Reciprocal covenants. We'll get there. Or Morgan's anticipating you have C, D, E, and F, right? 4 different layers of people, right? That comes next. Everyone with me? All right. Okay. All right, Elizabeth, let me ask you a question, please. So we discuss here that B sold Blackacre to C. Right? Let's pretend that this transaction didn't happen, right? Let's pretend B still owns it. A sells Whiteacre to D. Okay? A sells Whiteacre to D. Okay? Now B builds a factory. Can D sue B? Well, here's where things get messy. When the burden runs, you need to assume the entire estate, vertical privity. For the benefit to run, do you need vertical privity? Well, look at it this way, right? This is where it gets messy, right? B is still bound by the contract, right? D purchases Blackacre from A. Are D and A in privity? Yeah. So the way it works is like this. Just follow my finger, right? Because they're in privity, pretend D is over here. D can still sue B, right? The rules for the benefit running are a lot easier, right? The rules for the benefit running are a lot easier. Okay? When you're talking about the benefit, you could still sue B on the contract. Okay? Now, let me twist it up a little bit. Now, Dakota, let me ask you a question. let's say that A has fee simple and he sells D a life estate. Okay, A is fee simple and he sells D a life estate. Siri can't help you with this, right? Can D sue B? Again, only life estate here.
So he doesn't acquire the same title that A has.
He doesn't have the complete estate. Yeah, a lesser interest.
In that case, there's no privity of estate between A and D, so he can't sue B.
Okay, so you're wrong, but let me tell you why. This is why I think the book is misleading, right? You think, oh, of course, if vertical privity here means you accept the full bundle of sticks, then of course vertical privity here means the same thing. No. And if you look at 837, it actually says this. It says, a more relaxed standard is used for running the benefit. The promise is enforceable by a person who succeeds to the original promisee's estate or to a lesser interest carved out of the estate. You'll see that in your book. This is why I think the diagram, the text I just read you, I think is correct, but the diagram is misleading. And the editor, Strielevitz, the junior guy in the book, agrees with me on this one, right? That even if D were to get a life estate from A, D could still sue on the contract because he's benefited from it. Yeah.
So just to put it simply, the benefit isn't as easy to remove. You know, right here you're looking at.
Yes, the benefit, yeah, the law likes it when the benefit flows, but not when the burden flows, if I put it that way. Okay, everyone with me though, right? So in this case, D could sue B. D can sue B even if D has a life estate or a lesser interest, because for the benefit, it's easier to run. For the burden to run, you need to have the full estate, fee simple, whatever it happens to be. I'm not done with this picture yet. We got one more. One more. All right. Alexis, so the hardest one, right? How in the world could D ever sue C? That's like the you know the most complicated one, right? In what situation could D sue C? That's the hard one.
Is it if both the benefit and the burden?
Yes, exactly right. Nailed it. Both the benefit and the burden have to run. Now, how does that happen? Right? What has to happen for both the benefit and burden to run? You have to have a couple things that have to happen.
Is it if A sells it to B and B sells it to C?
Let's go step by step, right? What's the first thing you have to have for the burden to run? The very first thing you have to have. What do you need? The first thing you always look for. Where do we start with this diagram?
Horizontal.
Okay, very good. What do you need to have horizontal privity? What has to happen?
Oh, privity of estate.
Between.
A and B.
And what has to happen to have privy of estate between A and B? What must have to happen here? How do you get privy of estate between A and B?
Oh, they.
You're so close. You're very close.
It's because the.
To have privity of estate, what has to be transferred?
Oh, the land with the covenant.
Yes, exactly. A would sell Blackacre to B with the covenant reserved. Everyone see that, right? The first step you need is A sells Blackacre to B with the covenant reserved. That's the first step. Step one. Everyone with me? Josh? What's step number 2 for the burden to run? What has to happen?
You have to have vertical privity.
Okay, and what does that mean?
So you have to.
Who sells what to whom?
Make a contract
Between?
between, I guess, A and D.
I said the burden to run.
The burden to run. Okay. Then
You start horizontal, then you ask about the burden. For the burden to run, what's have to happen here?
You'd have to, like,
Give me names.
B would have to sell it to C.
Yes. And what would B have to sell to C? Be precise here.
It would have to be what is it, privity of estate.
And what does that mean? What would B have to give to C?
So B would have to sell the land to C with the covenant.
How much of the land would you have to sell?
All of it.
That's what I'm looking for. Everything, the entire estate. In order for the burden to run, you have to have vertical privity. And to have vertical privity, you have to have the entirety of the estate from B to C. If it's fee simple, it's fee simple. If it's a life estate, whatever it happens to be, you give the entire thing. Look, I can make this tricky. I can say he has a life estate, and he can transfer his life estate, and that's his entire interest, right? It doesn't have to be fee simple. A lot of students think that way. It doesn't have to be. It can be leasehold, right? If B has a leasehold, he gives C his leasehold. It's like the assignment Jen mentioned a couple minutes ago. Okay, so we have 3 steps. Step number 1, you have to have horizontal privity, privity of estate. A sells Blackacre to B with a covenant reserve. That's step number 1. Step number 2, Josh told us. B sells Blackacre to C, his full estate. Whatever the bundle of stick is, say fee simple. Okay, that's for the burden to run. Javier, last one. What has to happen for the benefit to run?
A has to sell to D either equal or lesser?
Yes. Now, the second part, the or, is the key part. A can sell to D a lesser interest. Let's say that A has a fee simple and he gives a life estate to D. That's fine, right? You can do that. You're allowed to do that, right? Okay, you're allowed to do that. 3 steps, my friends. On any exam question, you need to do all 3 of these steps, right? You have to ask yourself, first, is there horizontal privity? Is there privy of estate? Was the land transferred with the covenant reserved? That's number 1. And then second, you have to ask, is the burden running? Right? Does the burden run from B to C? Is the entire estate being conveyed? Is there vertical privity? And then number 3, does the benefit run from A to D, which can be the same or the lesser interest? Okay, 3 questions, right? First, is a horizontal privity? That's privity of estate. Second, is there vertical privity for the burden? That is, the entire estate's transferred. And third, is there vertical privity for the benefit where any interest is transferred? You see why I'm annoyed at the editors that they say vertical privity and they don't specify if it's privity for the benefit or privity for the burden. I like calling it vertical privity for burden and vertical privity for benefit. It makes sense in my head, but your mileage may vary. All right. If this did not make sense, go rewatch the first 30 minutes of this class, or about 40 minutes now, right? We spent almost an hour on this one little diagram. I know, it's impossible, but you need to understand this process. It's not intuitive. Okay. That's the hardest part. After everything else is downhill, right? After this, the class gets a lot easier. Trust me on this one. All right. One final note that you're going to hate me for. This is how everything works under the common law. Under the modern rule, nothing of this matters. None of this matters. The third restatement abolished all this crap, right? The third restatement, it doesn't matter whether the benefit or the burden, everything runs. You don't need horizontal privity, you don't need vertical privity, which is why I will never test you on the third restatement, because it's so easy. I know. I've never once tested the third restatement of covenants. It's never happened, because it's so easy. It's like, of course the burden runs, of course the benefit runs. But most states have not adopted the third restatement, so this is what you actually will need to know in real life, which is why I don't like testing on it. Okay. Okay, everyone with me? Everyone understand what I just said, right? I hope so. If you didn't, go watch this video again. All right. I'm going to move on now to the other topics for today. All right. What I have been describing, this picture, are the requirements for real covenants at law. For real covenants at law. Okay? There are generally 3 requirements for a real covenant law to be effective. The first 2 are like almost automatic, which is why I focus entirely on the third one. But I'll tell you what the first 2 are. The first requirement for a real covenant law is you have to have the intent to bind successors. The intent to bind successors. What does that mean? Here, A had the intent of binding B and binding C. Right? That's what that would mean. That's almost automatic, right? The entire reason why you do a covenant is to bind people down the road. So this one almost is like never even relevant. That's pretty easy to satisfy. The second requirement gets a little trickier. We'll do a case in this later. That the covenant must touch and concern the land. Touch and concern the land. This is one of these phrases that sounds simple but gets a little complicated. In this case, a requirement to use land for residential purposes, that concerns the land. It touches it. It concerns it. Tells you how to use it. But you also have cases like where you have to pay money, which is somewhat novel. And that one, the court said, also touches and concerns. So everything touches and concerns nowadays. So really, the first 2 requirements are not very important. The third requirement is the important one. You have to have privity of estate, and that entails both horizontal and vertical privity for the burden to run. Okay, so really, on an exam question, you might want to give a sentence on the first 2 factors, and then give me everything on the privity one. That's where all of your attention is going to be focused. Just mention the first 2. You say, Josh, intent to bind, touch and concerns. Give me a sentence on those. That's fine. 2 sentences maybe, but the meat of your answer should be on whether the privity exists, whether there's horizontal and vertical privity. That's where all the action is. It's the hardest part by far. And that, unfortunately, resolves you to draw this diagram in your exam sheet. You will, I know you're laughing, but you're going to start drawing this everywhere. And yes, it will not be A, B, C, D. It'll be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? There'll be multiple parties. That was Morgan's question a few minutes ago. There will be other parties, I promise. And it's not just going to be like this. It'll be like E will be here and F will be here, right? It'll go multiple levels. Okay. All right. The second type of servitude I want to talk about is not a real covenant. Is what's called an equitable servitude. An equitable servitude resembles a real covenant in many regards. The first 2 requirements are the same. You have to have intent to bind and touch and concern. But the key distinction for now between a covenant and an equitable servitude is you don't need privity for an equitable servitude, right? This mess does not apply in equitable servitudes. You don't need it. It doesn't matter. The reason why is they're usually not in writing, right? You don't have a written instrument with equitable servitudes. It's equity courts enforce as a matter of fairness. Instead, you must have what's called notice. Notice, right? Where you're on notice that your property is being burdened. So think of the last case, right? You're in a residential community. Everyone here has houses. Maybe you shouldn't build a gas station in the middle of a residential community, right? That sort of thing. The topic there is notice. So again, on an exam, if I give you a question about an equitable servitude, don't tell me about privity. You will, I promise. At least half of you will make this mistake. If there's a question in the exam about equitable servitudes, do not give me privity. It's not relevant. Okay? But if the question is about covenants at law, you have to give me privity. You can't talk about notice. Everyone understand what I just said, right? You need to characterize the a servitude correctly. One way you can do it, is it in writing or not? If it's in writing, it's probably real covenant law. If it's not in writing, it's probably an equitable servitude. Are you seeking damages? It's probably a covenant law. If you're seeking an injunction, it's probably a servitude, equitable servitude, right? You need to use the facts I give you to determine what is at stake. And if you get the wrong characterization, you're going to mess up the question. It happens every year. I can predict it without fail. I know that was a lot. I threw a lot at you. Again, I encourage you to reread or rewatch today's video if it's not clear. Definitely before you do the midterm, rewatch at least today's class. Okay. Questions so far? Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew. I didn't see your hand. Please. Andrew was pointing at you. I appreciate that.
If you have a writing and it would have satisfied a real covenant, but the damages you want is the actual injunction rather than money damages. Can you sue on an equitable servitude because there's notice because they had an actual
right? So okay, let me answer your question two different ways. The first way is that the distinction between law and equity is largely gone. You probably did this in CivPro. There was a time in the English courts where we had courts of law and courts of equity. And the courts of law could only issue monetary damages, and the courts of equity could issue injunctive relief. That is basically gone today, right? In American court systems, I think in virtually every state, they're merged. So a court of law can give you both equitable and monetary relief. So that doesn't make much of a difference. But what happens if, let's say you have, this is how I can trick you on this, right? Let's say you have a case where there's a written document, but you don't have horizontal privity. You can go to a court and say, can you please enforce this as a servitude? Like I said again, you have a covenant here, but it's only privy of contract. There's no privy of estate. And you want the court to enforce it against C as a matter of equity. If C was on notice that B had that covenant, the court might enforce it as servitude. This is why Morgan's question was somewhat dancing around it before, right? Courts can enforce an equitable servitude even if something's in writing, but it doesn't meet the privity requirements. So, I mean, if you really want to ace my exam, you can say it's not enforceable as a covenant, but it might be enforceable as an equitable servitude because the notice was present. Right? Everyone see what I just said? Let me repeat Andrew's question. It was quite good. You might have a situation where the covenant is not enforceable at law, but the court can enforce the agreement as an equitable servitude because there was notice. Everyone see what he just said? I think that's a good question. Right? So maybe C is not bound by the covenant as a matter of law, won't have to pay damages, but the court can tell C to stop building the factory to honor the equitable servitude. That's entirely, I think, feasible. But thank you for that question. Everyone get what you just said, right? So, I mean, again, on the exam, I can just say, is this covenant enforceable? You say, no, it's not, but the court may come in as an equitable servitude and enforce it, which I think is a perfectly valid justification. I think that'd be, that's between like 8 out of 10 and a 10 out of 10 if you get that extra little bump. Everyone see that? All right, let's do a case. We're 20 minutes left. We'll do them quickly, right? Tulk versus Moxhay. Who's next? Yeah, you want to give me the facts? The facts here are actually pretty straightforward. They're pretty quick. Can you give me the facts here, please?
Yeah. So the plaintiff sold a piece of Leicester Square to...
Yeah, it's pronounced Leicester, but not important. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. To Elms.
Yeah.
The deed of conveyance contains the covenant by Elms for himself.
Good.
His heirs, and his daughters.
Good. Okay.
Elms then conveyed the property to the defendant. His purchase deed didn't contain the covenant, but he admitted to having notice of the covenant.
Ah, this is his question, right? So in England, can they enforce real covenant law like this? But what do they enforce it as? Bingo. This is basically Andrew's question, right? In the UK, they don't have real covenants at law. We have them here. But even though there was no real covenant law to be enforced, the court treated this as an equitable servitude because there was notice. Because the guy had noticed you weren't supposed to turn this park into do construction in the park. Right? No construction in the park, right? Whatever it was, right? So as a result, the Tulk case is basically an instance where the covenant law cannot be enforced, but the equitable servitude could be enforced as a matter of equity by the courts. Everyone see that? It's a short case. It was like barely a page long. But I think it teaches the point Andrew raised a moment ago quite well. So in other words, always think of both, right? If it fails as a covenant law, can you make it work as a equitable servitude if notice is present? Everyone see that? Yeah. So that case is going to be real quick, right? Right. Okay. Okay. All right. The next case is a little bit more tricky. Neponsit Neponsit Property Owners Association versus Emigrant Industrial Savings Bank. Let me just give a little bit of a background. Today, deed restricted communities are fairly common. If you drive around Houston, you always see signs that says deed restricted community. I mean, you probably live in one, maybe. I live in one, right? The way it works is every year I pay a fee. You call it a condo fee or a townhome fee, whatever they want to call it, right? You pay a fee to this corporation, and this corporation then uses that money to maintain the grounds, maintain the grass, maintain the swimming pool, right? Maintain the sidewalks, right? There are all these sorts of things that money requires that we all pool money collectively, and they use that to improve the facilities. Okay. Now, someone asked me the other day, I can't remember what it was, is this done by a covenant? And the answer is yes, right? So today, when I bought my land, right, I bought it in fee simple from someone else, but it was subject to a covenant. Now, how did this begin? Back in the 70s, at least where I live, there was a huge plot of land. There was a single owner, and he subdivided it. He chopped it up into many little plots. And when he subdivided it, he subdivided it with the covenant on it. Right? That's the key. That's what we call a subdivision, right? You have one owner who sells to B, to C, to D, to E, to F, right, to everyone, with the covenant on it. That creates the horizontal privity. That creates privity of estate. So every single unit in my community where I live was chopped up such that there was privity of estate. And then when I buy a fee simple lot from someone else, I am now bound by that burden. So now I have to allow, it's like something stupid, like I can't change outside of my house without permission, right? Dumb stuff like that. But like I can't do whatever I want. I'm restricted, right? If I want to change a door, I have to get permission from some sort of stupid committee, right? I have to do that actually soon, right? But whatever. That's part of the habit of living in one of these subdivisions. Actually, they're not that onerous, right? As long as you ask for permission, they'll give it to you. You just have to ask. They're not unreasonable, so I shouldn't make fun, but it happens. But this was somewhat novel, right? Because generally, when you had this sort of agreement, it was between A and B, a person. The Neponsit case was unique because the promisor was not a person, it was a corporation. And you may have studied in constitutional law, maybe not yet, but under the law, corporations are generally considered people. But was it for purposes of property? And this gave rise to the question of touch and concern, right? Does collecting money in a fee, right? You pay X dollars per square, X dollars per square foot. Does collecting money from my lot touch and concern spending the money somewhere else, right? They're taking money from Josh on my lot, Blackacre, and that money is being used to, say, build a swimming pool down the block or build a garden down the block, right? Usually the restriction on Blackacre burdens Blackacre for the benefit of Whiteacre. But here, it's burdening Blackacre for the benefit of some third party, which is basically this community, this organization that was built. So the Neponsit case was a case of, not first impression, but an important early case about whether you can have these arrangements where property A is being burdened, but the benefits being spread out to too many people who are not in privity with them. Everyone understand? So Jasmine, walk me through the court's analysis in Neponsit. How does this is the New York Court of Appeals. How does the New York Court of Appeals handle this case? You can give me facts if you want. A what company? I think you said realty?
They were, yeah, a realty company.
Realty company. Okay, go on. Yeah.
So they had basically a deed that had a covenant on it, and basically what the covenant said was that any of its like leasers or anybody who like used their land or signed a lease with them.
Well, it wasn't a lease though, right? People were buying the land, right?
Yeah. So if they bought parts of their land,
Good.
and it said in the deed that they had to pay an annual fee for maintenance.
Very good.
And it had basically like in the contract it said that if you failed to make the payment, they had a lien and they could like foreclose on the lien for non-payment.
Okay, very good. So what was novel about this was the burden was not you use it for industrial or for residential. The burden was you pay money. And it wasn't clear if you could do this. Now, who do we got over here? Can't see it. Katie, did the court uphold this this payment of money as an aspect of covenant law?
Yeah, that it was the first touch.
Okay, so why does, again, there are three requirements, right? Was there intent? Of course, was intent. Was there privity? I think the privity is actually kind of dicey. The court doesn't put a lot of weight, but like I don't know if you can have privity with this corporation. I'm not sure, but whatever, they prove it, right? But their hardest trouble is the touch and concern, right? So, Katie, just walk me through the touch and concern analysis. It's kind of weird. I mean, it's not satisfying. I'll put it that way. How does the court define touch and concern? What's the test they put forward? Sorry?
Should be inseparable? No.
What's the test? They give a test. It's kind of weird.
Is that where they talk about it's a settled rule that a covenant does not own the land, burden of funds on guarantee?
Tanya, you have it? Is that Tanya? I'm sorry. What's the test the court formulates?
Does it have to do with the benefit? Like it benefits the entire community, including this assignment? So it touches and concerns.
Yeah, but how they define touch and concern? What's the test they put forward? Yeah, Rob. Yeah, you're really close. Substantially alters rights. There it is, right? So the court says, does the covenant substantially alter rights? In this case, I guess it does because it makes them pay money for a public purpose, and that money is then used to build roads and gardens and public spaces, etc. Let me summarize this for you. The court basically blinks and says, you know what? We don't really know what this phrase means. It's an old phrase that doesn't really have any significance. So we're going to put forward a test that basically applies to anything, right? Anything substantially alters rights, right? Any sort of restriction alters the nature of rights. Therefore, this is always checked, right? So factor number one is basically always checked. Factor number two is basically always checked. And here they basically ignore the privity, so factor three is always checked. That's why under the modern rule, none of this stuff matters. Under the modern rule, the benefits are always going to run and the burden's always going to run, right? Which is why I don't ask you the modern question, it's so damn easy, right? So this case represents a relaxing, if you will, of the strict rules of covenants, right? After this case, at least in New York, the benefits and the burden's always going to run so long as it's in writing and there's notice. That's really all you're going to need. And I don't want to summarize it so glibly, but that's more or less there. In other words, it doesn't really even matter anymore whether you have an equitable servitude or a covenant. It makes no difference. So long as there's some sort of notice and people have an intent to bind you, guess what? You're bound. And the distinction between damages and injunctions doesn't matter anymore because courts are merged. So under the modern rule, whether you have an equitable servitude or a covenant, it makes no difference. And this case basically starts to reflect the merging of those two concepts. Now you just call it a servitude, right? If you want to look at the restatement third, I think you just call it a servitude. Don't even bother with the labels, right? Horizontal privity doesn't matter, but you need to know it for common law. Yes, Morgan?
So if this was at common law and they did not have notice, the courts would still not enforce it as a federal servitude for fairness?
Well, there was notice here.
If there wasn't notice, would they still enforce it?
Yes. If this was a common law and there was no notice, I don't think this would be enforceable. But look, there's always going to be notice, right? You're in a private gated community with these beautiful gardens, right? And these nice public spaces. You should know that's probably someone taking money to do this, right? So
they can infer the notice?
yes. But at common law, it still would have failed because of touch and concern, right? Because even if you have notice, if it doesn't actually touch and concern your land, you can't enforce it. But here, they basically had such a broad definition that everything touches and concerns the land, right? Because at common law, at least how I understood it, touch and concern means what is happening to my property. Here, it's what are you doing to someone else's property? And that, I think, goes too far. So the big change here wasn't on notice. It was in the second one, touch and concern. That's where I think the biggest change was. So really, does this case uphold it as a real covenant? Does it uphold it as an equitable servitude? I think it's kind of fuzzy. I don't know, I see people nodding. Like every time I read them, like, wait, what exactly is this? Is it fish or fowl, right? Is this a covenant law? Is this an equitable servitude? What exactly is this? And I think it's a fuzzy opinion. I think it's probably, I don't know what I go back and forth. But it doesn't matter, right? Because there's notice. And basically, as long as there's notice, you're going to win. Yeah.
So that definition for touch and concern
Substantial alter for both. Yeah.
only for modern law or both common law?
No. I think that's modern law.
Okay.
I think that's the third. That's like the third restatement hadn't been published yet, but this I think sort of predicts where the third restatement is coming out.
So at common law, it should just be if it touches and affects.
I mean, the way I understand touch concern at common law is: are you telling me how to use my land, right? Or is this about some third other party, which I don't think it is. That's how. Again, the court sort of struggles. Like, well, there's these definitions we won't really like very much. Let's make one up. This is like I get very cynical in property too because I don't like modern law. I like the common law because it makes sense and there's rules. I don't like this like whatever, anything goes. That's the formalist in me. You're not my common law students, but you can probably see how I figure things in common law. Property originalist or something like that. Okay. Wait till we get to takings. You're going to see it. Okay. It's my least favorite topic to teach in this class. Questions on that? Yes. Yeah, Jen.
Just to clarify what Zach said, if you ask a question on the final, we're not supposed to talk about this if you say an instruction.
Common law. Yeah, this is not the common law approach. This is a modern approach. Very, very clear about that. Yeah. I will not ask you about Neponsit. Because I mean, look, this would make for an awful question to say, yep, everything touches and concerns the land. There's no analysis. Like, yeah, sure, why not? Whatever. Meh, right? You know, it's good enough. Yeah, shrug emoji. Right? I don't know. It's whatever. Close enough. That's not law that I care about. I want rules, privity, horizontal. All right, let's do the last case. Brianna, let's do the last case. It's actually pretty straightforward. What were the facts in the Sanford case?
So the long ones, they large pieces of land, basically subdivided it into smaller parcels.
Uh-huh.
And then they conveyed a number of those portions of the land to other people. And in the conveyance, it included the restriction that only residences would be built on the property.
Mhm.
And then 2 years later, the McLeans purchased some of the land, and their title did not include the restriction.
Okay.
So then
Yes.
they built a gas station on their land.
Good.
And then,
So why the hell not, right?
right. And then the Sanborn and some other neighbors that
Good.
bought property around them sued the McLeans and joined their construction of the gas station.
Okay.
And then the trial court granted it.
Good. Okay, thank you so much, Brianna. So this is a case where some of the deeds in the communities had a written covenant, and some of the deeds in the community did not have a written covenant. Now, Gabriella, did the deed McLean have? Did it meet the strict rules of privity? Was there a strict, would it meet the strict rules of privity of estate? That the covenant was expressly reserved?
No, I don't think it was in that.
It was not. So then why does he lose? He loses. Even though they don't have strict privity of estate, why does he still lose? What does the court look to? What's this doctrine they come up with? Jalen? Yeah, what's that phrase? Give me the full phrase. You're really close. It's like, yes. Say it one more time. You got it. Just say it one more time. Very good. The doctrine of implied reciprocal negative servitudes. Let me say it one more time for you. The doctrine of implied reciprocal negative servitudes. And Jalen, just finish it up. What does that doctrine say? You're right. Tell me, what does that doctrine say? What was the implied negative reciprocal servitude in this case?
It says that the reciprocal negative easement had attached the lots.
Uh-huh. Why? Even though it wasn't in writing, why did it attach?
Sorry. It was attached to be. It's enforced now by the plaintiffs that they, because they had the knowledge.
That's it. Notice, exactly. They were on inquiry notice, right? Think of the Recording Act statutes. If you see everyone in your community has residential houses, right? You are put on inquiry notice that maybe you're in the same subdivision, you have the same restriction. So even there's no written covenant, there's implied, right? Implied is the opposite of written. And it's reciprocal because if A restricts B, then B restricts C, then C restricts D. Everything was in the same loop, right? So the court basically says, even though the rigid requirements of privity are not satisfied here, we're going to enforce the servitude anyway as a matter of equity, right? So I guess this is a kind of an equitable servitude if you want to think of it that way, because there's notice, and the notice comes from inquiry notice, right? But they make up these big fancy words like implied reciprocal negative servitude. My goodness, mouthful. Okay, thank you. Okay, questions on the I said Sanford, I'm sorry, it's Sanborn. So if I screwed up your notes, I apologize. Sanborn. All right, let me try to summarize briefly because you got a lot today. With these questions, you need to ask yourself a series of questions, right? First off, what kind of servitude are we dealing with? Is it an easement or a covenant, right? If it's an easement, remember, is it engrossed or appertenant? Are we dealing with a covenant? Okay, is it a covenant law or is it an equitable servitude, right? If it's a covenant law, you have to figure out, was there horizontal privity of estate? Is there vertical privity for the burden? Is there vertical privity for the benefit? If you're dealing with an equitable servitude, it's a little bit easier. You ask, is there notice? And if there's notice, the court's going to enforce as a matter of equity and issue injunctions. Right? There's a lot in what I just said. I need you to unpack that and go through very carefully in your notes. But you have to go through all those steps in the exam. You can't just assume, we have here a covenant or we have here an easement. You need to walk me through. This is a covenant. It's at law. Here's the horizontal privity. There's a vertical privity for the burden. There's a vertical privity for the benefit. Or this is only equitable servitude. It can't be enforced at law. But you have notice the courts can issue injunctions. You need to walk me through step by step by step to get there. All right. Questions? All right, please take the sample exam from last year and you come talk to me about it. Appreciate it. Thank you.